My daughter-in-law re-gifted my present, saying it was tacky. So I withdrew her monthly allowance. My name is Margaret Eleanor Whitman. I'm 72 years old, and I live in a beautiful colonial home that I've owned for 38 years in suburban Connecticut. This is the story of how my own family pushed me too far, and how I finally taught them a lesson they'd never forget, starting when my daughter-in-law had the audacity to re-gift the expensive jewelry I'd given her for her birthday, calling it tacky to her friends at a dinner party I wasn't even invited to. But let me start from the beginning, because this story didn't happen overnight. It was years in the making, like a slow-burning fuse that finally reached the dynamite. When my dear husband Richard passed away 6 years ago, he left me very well provided for. Between his successful accounting firm, our investments, and the properties we'd accumulated over 45 years of marriage, I found myself in the enviable position of being a wealthy widow. Richard had always said, "Maggie, when I'm gone, you take care of the family, but don't let them take advantage of your good heart." How prophetic those words would prove to be. My son Michael had married Jessica 8 years ago, and I'll admit, I had reservations from the start. She was beautiful, charming when she wanted something, but there was something calculating in those green eyes of hers. Still, Michael was happy, and I wanted to welcome her into our family with open arms. After Richard's funeral, I made what I thought was a generous decision. I would give Jessica and Michael a monthly allowance of $3,000 to help them as they started their life together. Michael was still building his career in marketing, and Jessica had quit her job as a dental hygienist after they married, claiming she wanted to focus on being a wife and maybe starting a family soon. That soon never came, but the expectation of my monthly checks certainly did. At first, they seemed grateful. Jessica would call me every month to thank me, sometimes even sending little cards. Michael would bring her by for Sunday dinners, and we'd chat about their plans, their dreams, their needs. When they wanted to upgrade their apartment to a nicer place, I helped with the security deposit. When Jessica wanted to redecorate, I gave them an extra $5,000 for furniture. When their car broke down, I bought them a nearly new Honda CR-V. I told myself I was being a good mother and mother-in-law. I was helping my family thrive. Richard would have approved, but somewhere along the way their gratitude transformed into expectation. The thank you calls became shorter, then less frequent, then disappeared entirely. The Sunday dinners became obligations they'd try to get out of. "We're so busy, Mom," Michael would say. "Maybe next week." The first real warning sign came about 3 years ago during Christmas. I had spent weeks shopping for the perfect gifts for everyone. For Jessica, I found a beautiful cashmere scarf at Nordstrom. Soft gray with a delicate pattern. $350. The kind of quality that would last for decades. When she opened it on Christmas morning, her face fell slightly. "Oh," she said, forcing a smile. "It's lovely, Margaret. Very warm." Later, when she thought I couldn't hear, I caught her whispering to Michael in the kitchen. "God, does she think I'm 80? Who wears gray cashmere anymore?" My heart stung, but I pushed the feeling down. Maybe I was out of touch with what young women like these days. Maybe I should ask her more directly about her preferences. So I did. For her birthday that spring, I asked her what she'd like. "Oh, Margaret, you don't need to get me anything," she said sweetly over the phone. "Your generosity with the monthly allowance is more than enough." But I wanted to get her something special. Something that showed I was listening, that I cared about her taste. I asked Michael what she might like. "She's been looking at jewelry lately," he said. "Maybe something modern? She likes those contemporary designers." I spent hours researching current jewelry trends, visiting boutiques, speaking with salespeople, half my age who used words like statement pieces and architectural designs. Finally, I found it. A stunning silver necklace by a trendy designer, modern and geometric. Exactly the kind of thing I'd seen Jessica looking at in magazines. It cost $800, but seeing her face light up would be worth every penny. Her birthday. Dinner was at a nice restaurant. When she opened the box, her eyes widened. "Oh my goodness, Margaret! This is actually really beautiful. I love it. Thank you so much." She put it on immediately, and I felt a warm glow of satisfaction. Finally, I'd gotten it right. But as the months went by, I noticed something odd. I never saw Jessica wearing the necklace again. Not once. When I'd compliment other jewelry she wore, I'd sometimes add, "Though I still love that silver necklace on you," hoping she'd wear it more often. "Oh, that one," she'd say vaguely. "It's lovely, but it doesn't go with everything, you know?" I started paying closer attention to their behavior, and once you start looking, you see things you've been blind to before. Jessica had developed a habit of making little comments about my old-fashioned taste. When I'd suggest restaurants for family dinners, she'd wrinkle her nose and say, "Maybe somewhere a bit more current." When I wore what I thought was a nice outfit, she'd look me up and down and say, "That's a very classic look, Margaret." The monthly allowance, which had started as a generous gift, had become something they simply expected. They never mentioned it, never thanked me for it, and when their direct deposit would occasionally be a day or two late due to bank processing, Jessica would actually call to ask where it was. "Hi, Margaret. Just wondering about this month's transfer. We have bills to pay, you know." Bills to pay. As if my money was their salary. Michael seemed oblivious to his wife's attitude, or maybe he'd just become so accustomed to my generosity that he'd forgotten it was generosity at all. When they decided to take a vacation to Europe last summer, they mentioned it casually, as if it was just a fact of life that they could afford such trips. "How lovely," I said. "That sounds expensive." "Oh, we'll manage," Jessica said airily. "We always do." Yes, I thought. You always do. Because I make sure you always do. Last Thanksgiving was when things really started to unravel. I had offered to host, as I always did, but Jessica suggested they'd prefer to have dinner at their place. "We want to establish our own traditions," she explained. "You understand." I did understand, or at least I tried to. So I brought wine, flowers, and a homemade apple pie, Richard's favorite recipe, one I'd been making for decades. The dinner was nice enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being tolerated. Like I was the elderly relative they had to include out of obligation. Jessica kept checking her phone during dinner, and when I tried to tell a story about Richard's old Thanksgiving traditions, she barely looked up. After dinner, as I was getting ready to leave, I overheard Jessica talking to someone on the phone. In the kitchen. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the kitchen was right next to the coat closet. "Oh, it was fine," she was saying. "A bit old-fashioned. You know how it is with older people. She brought this ancient apple pie recipe. I mean, it was sweet of her. But honestly, who makes pie from scratch anymore? There are perfectly good ones at Whole Foods." That hurt. That really hurt. But I told myself I was being oversensitive. Maybe I was old-fashioned. Maybe I needed to accept that times had changed. The real breaking point began building last spring, around Jessica's birthday again. This time, I decided to ask her directly what she wanted, to avoid any more misunderstandings. "Honestly, Margaret," she said, I've been eyeing this beautiful bracelet at Tiffany's, but it's quite expensive, and I know you already do so much for us." She showed me a picture on her phone. It was lovely. A delicate tennis bracelet with small diamonds. Elegant and timeless. The price tag was $2,400, more than I'd ever spent, on a single gift for her, but she seemed to genuinely love it. "If that's what you really want," I said, "then that's what you'll get." Her face lit up with the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. "Really? Oh, Margaret, you're the best mother-in-law ever." I went to Tiffany's the next day and bought the bracelet. The salesperson wrapped it in their signature blue box with a white ribbon, and I felt excited to give it to her. Maybe this would turn things around between us. Maybe this would show her that I understood her taste. That I respected her preferences. Her birthday party was at a trendy restaurant in downtown Hartford. Michael had invited several of their friends, couples I'd met briefly at previous gatherings, but didn't know well. I was the only family member there, which should have been my second warning sign. The first was that they'd reserved a table, for 8, and I got the distinct impression that I was the +1 they'd forgotten to account for. But when Jessica opened the Tiffany box, everything seemed worth it. She gasped audibly, her eyes wide with genuine delight. "Oh my God, Margaret! This is incredible! I can't believe you remembered." She put it on immediately, holding her wrist up to catch the light. "Look how it sparkles. This is seriously the most beautiful thing I've ever owned." She hugged me tightly, and for a moment, everything felt right between us. Her friends were suitably impressed, asking to see the bracelet, complimenting my generosity. I felt like I'd finally gotten it right, finally found the key to Jessica's heart. For the rest of the evening, she kept showing off the bracelet, telling everyone how thoughtful and generous I was. I went home feeling better about our relationship than I had in years. 3 weeks later, everything changed. I was having lunch with my friend Dorothy at the country club when she mentioned something that made my blood freeze. "I saw your daughter-in-law at the Hendersons' anniversary party last weekend," Dorothy said casually, buttering her roll. She looked lovely as always, and that bracelet she was wearing was absolutely stunning. "Bracelet?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I knew which one she meant. Yes, the diamond tennis bracelet. She was telling everyone it was a gift from her husband for their anniversary. Such a thoughtful young man, your Michael. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat down my fork, trying to process what Dorothy had just said. She said Michael gave it to her? Oh yes, she was quite effusive about it. Going on and about how he'd saved up for months to surprise her, how he knew exactly what she wanted. Quite romantic, really. I managed to finish lunch, though. I don't remember eating anything else. My mind was reeling. The bracelet I'd given Jessica for her birthday. The $2,400. Tiffany bracelet that had made her hug me and call me the best mother-in-law ever. She was telling people that Michael had given it to her. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that she'd apparently worn it to a party I wasn't invited to, at the home of people I'd known for 20 years, and completely erased my role in the gift. In her version of the story, I didn't exist. I drove home in a daze, Dorothy's words echoing in my head. Was this an isolated incident? A moment of confusion? Maybe she'd misspoken, gotten flustered, forgotten to mention that it was from me. But deep down, I knew better. This felt deliberate. This felt like betrayal. I spent the next few days in a strange state of heightened awareness, like someone had adjusted the focus on my life, and I was seeing details I'd missed before. I started paying attention to things I'd previously overlooked. Began checking their social media more carefully. Jessica posted frequently on Instagram and Facebook, sharing photos of their dinners out, their weekend trips, their social gatherings. In several photos, I could see her wearing jewelry I'd given her over the years, but never with any mention of where the pieces had come from. More troubling, I started noticing how often they went out to expensive restaurants, took weekend trips, bought new clothes and gadgets. The lifestyle they were maintaining seemed well beyond what they could afford on Michael's salary alone, even with my monthly allowance. Were they telling people that all of this was funded by Michael's success? Were they presenting themselves as a prosperous young couple while conveniently forgetting to mention the woman who was actually paying for their lifestyle? I decided to test my theory. For Mother's Day, instead of waiting for them to reach out to me, I called and suggested we have brunch together. Just the three of us. Someplace nice. "Oh, that sounds lovely, Mom," Michael said. "But we already have plans that day. Jessica's sister's in town, and we're taking her to that new place everyone's talking about. Harvest and Vine? You know, the one with the waiting list." Harvest and Vine. The restaurant that charged $45 for brunch entrees. The restaurant that my monthly allowance was probably helping to pay for. "Maybe the following weekend?" I suggested. "Let me check with Jess and get back to you." He never got back to me. I spent Mother's Day alone, which wasn't unusual, but this time it felt different. This time it felt intentional. The end came in late August, at what should have been a celebration. Michael's company had landed a big client, and he'd gotten a seziosi promotion with a modest raise. Jessica decided to throw a dinner party to celebrate. "Just a small gathering of friends," she said when she called to invite me. I was touched to be included, especially since their social gatherings had become increasingly rare for me. I brought a nice bottle of champagne and looked forward to celebrating Michael's success. The party was at their apartment, which I noticed had been redecorated again since my last visit. New furniture, new art on the walls, everything tasteful and expensive looking. I wondered if they'd used their own money for the updates, or if some of my monthly allowance had found its way into the new decor. There were about 10 people there, mostly couples from their social circle. I knew a few of them in passing, but mostly I felt like the outsider I was clearly becoming. About halfway through the evening, I was standing near the kitchen island, sipping wine and trying to make small talk with a woman named Linda, when I heard Jessica's voice from the living room. "Oh, that old thing?" she was saying with a laugh. "Michael's mother gave it to me for my birthday. It's not really my style, a bit tacky, to be honest. But you know how mothers-in-law are. They mean well." I turned toward the sound of her voice and saw her standing with 2 other women, holding something small and sparkly in her hand. My heart stopped when I realized what it was. The diamond tennis bracelet. My $2,400 Tiffany bracelet. The one she'd hugged me for. The one she'd called the most beautiful thing she'd ever owned. But she wasn't wearing it. She was holding it like a prop, a visual aid for her story about her tacky, well-meaning mother-in-law. "I felt so bad," she continued, "because she was so proud of herself for picking it out. But honestly, who wears tennis bracelets anymore? It's so 1985. I tried to find a way to return it, but she bought it at Tiffany's, and they have that whole policy about custom engravings." Custom engravings. I'd had them engrave "To Jessica, with love, Margaret," on the inside of the clasp, a detail I'd thought was thoughtful, but which had apparently trapped her into keeping a gift she found. "Tacky, so what did you do with it?" one of the women asked. Jessica's smile turned mischievous. "Well, my friend Sarah's birthday was coming up, and she loves vintage jewelry. So I had the engraving polished off and gave it to her as a birthday present. She absolutely loved it. said it was the most generous gift she'd ever received. The woman standing next to her gasped. "You re-gifted your mother-in-law's present?" "I prefer to think of it as finding it a more appreciative home," Jessica said with a laugh. "Sarah wears it all the time. At least someone's getting enjoyment out of it." I stood there, frozen, my wineglass trembling in my hand. The conversation continued around me, but I couldn't hear anything over the sound of my own heart pounding. She had re-gifted my bracelet, the $2,400 bracelet I'd bought because she'd specifically asked for it. The bracelet she'd claimed to love, that had made her call me the best mother-in-law ever. She'd had my personal engraving removed and given it to someone else, all while mocking me to her friends. And then, as if the universe wanted to make sure I got the full picture, I heard her say something that broke my heart completely. Honestly, sometimes I think Michael's mother just throws money at problems because she doesn't know how to connect with people normally. Like, I get that she's lonely since her husband died, but buying expensive gifts doesn't make up for having no personality. The woman next to her made a sympathetic sound. "That's so sad. But hey, at least she's generous, right?" "Oh, extremely generous," Jessica said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "We get a very comfortable monthly allowance from her. It's basically how we afford to live in this neighborhood and go out as much as we do. Michael doesn't make nearly enough, on his own. Wow, that's really generous of her." "It is," Jessica agreed. "Though between you and me, I think she feels guilty about something. Maybe she wasn't a great mother when Michael was growing up. I don't know, but the guilt money is definitely working in our favor." Guilt money. She thought my generosity was guilt money. I set my wineglass down on the counter with shaking hands and walked to the bathroom, where I locked the door and stared at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, my hands were trembling, and I felt like I might throw up. Everything I'd done for them, every kindness, every gift, every check. They saw it as guilt money from a lonely old woman with no personality who didn't know how to connect with people. I'd been subsidizing their lifestyle while they mocked me behind my back. I'd been the generous mother-in-law while they saw me as the pathetic widow throwing money at problems. And the bracelet, my beautiful, thoughtful, expensive bracelet that I'd chosen so carefully, had been reduced to a tacky cast-off that she'd literally given away while mocking my taste to strangers. I stayed in that bathroom for a long time, staring at my reflection and feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Pure, cold anger. When I finally came out, I found Michael in the kitchen. "Mom, are you okay? You look a little pale." I looked at my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised to be kind and grateful and honest, and realized he'd either heard Jessica's conversation and said nothing, or he was so oblivious to his wife's cruelty that he might as well have been complicit. "I'm fine," I said quietly. "Just tired. I think I'll head home." "Already? The party's just getting started." "I've heard enough," I said. And I meant it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of the house Richard and I had built together, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. For 6 years I'd been trying to buy their love and respect with my generosity. For 6 years I'd been making excuses for Jessica's behavior, telling myself she was young, that she meant well, that I was being too sensitive. But there was no excuse for what I'd heard that night. There was no innocent explanation for regifting my bracelet and mocking me to strangers. There was no justification for calling my generosity guilt money, while continuing to cash my checks every month. I thought about Richard, about what he would say if he could see what was happening. I could almost hear his voice. "Maggie, you're not an ATM. You're a human being who deserves respect." By the time the sun came up, I'd made my decision. It was time to teach them a lesson about taking people for granted. I spent the weekend researching and planning. The first thing I did was call my financial advisor, James Morrison, who'd been handling my accounts since Richard's death. "James, I need to make some changes to my automatic transfers," I said when he answered. "Of course, Mrs. Whitman." "What can I help you with?" "I want to cancel the monthly $3,000 transfer to Michael and Jessica's account, effective immediately." There was a pause. "Are you sure? You've been making that transfer for—" "Let me check. Almost 6 years now." "I'm very—" "Sure. May I ask if there's a problem? Sometimes these family financial arrangements can get complicated, and there might be a way to—" "James?" I interrupted gently but firmly. "There's no misunderstanding here. I want that transfer stopped permanently. Can you do that for me?" "Of course I can. I'll process the cancellation today. Is there anything else I can help you with?" "Actually, yes. I'd like to schedule a meeting to review my will and discuss some other changes to my financial arrangements." "Certainly. How about Wednesday afternoon?" "Perfect." The next call was to my lawyer, Patricia Henley. Patricia had handled Richard's estate and had been the family attorney for over 15 years. "Patricia, I need to make some significant changes to my will," I said. "Of course, Margaret. Should I assume this has something to do with Michael and Jessica?" Patricia had always been perceptive. "What makes you say that?" "Well, in my experience, when a client wants to make significant changes to their will, it's usually because of family drama. And you've mentioned some concerns about Jessica in the past." "Had I?" "I suppose I had, during casual conversations over the years. Little comments about feeling unappreciated, about wondering if I was being too generous." "You're right," I said. "I think it's time to make some adjustments to reflect the reality of my relationships with my family." "I understand. Why don't you come in this week, and we'll discuss your options." Wednesday's meeting with Patricia was illuminating. We spent 2 hours going through my current will and discussing alternatives. Currently, you have Michael inheriting the house and about 60% of your assets, with the remaining 40% split between various charities, she summarized. "And if something happens to Michael, then his share would go to Jessica as his spouse." The thought of Jessica inheriting my house, the house Richard and I had bought as newlyweds, the house where we'd raised Michael, the house filled with 40 years of memories, made my stomach turn. "I want to make some changes," I said. We spent the rest of the meeting restructuring everything. Michael would still inherit, but significantly less. The house would go to a family trust that would allow him to live in it if he wanted, but would prevent him from selling it or leaving it to Jessica if their marriage ended. The bulk of my assets would go to the charities Richard and I had always supported, with specific provisions that would make it very difficult for anyone to contest the will. "Are you sure about this, Margaret?" Patricia asked as we finalized. "The changes. These are significant modifications." "I'm absolutely sure," I said. "I want to make sure my money goes to people who will appreciate it and use it for good." The following Monday, I got the call I'd been expecting. "Mom?" Michael's voice was strained. "There seems to be some problem with the bank transfer this month. Jessica checked the account, and the money isn't there." "That's because I canceled the transfer," I said calmly. Silence. "You... what?" "I canceled the monthly allowance, Michael. Permanently." But why? Did we do something wrong? Is this about missing Mother's Day? Because we can make that up to you." "This isn't about Mother's Day," I said. "This is about respect, or rather the lack of it." "Mom, I don't understand. What are you talking about? I think you need to have a conversation with your wife about how she talks about me when she thinks I can't hear her. Another pause. Longer this time. What did she say? Ask her, Michael. Ask her about the bracelet I gave her for her birthday. Ask her what she did with it, and what she told her friends about it. Ask her what she calls my generosity when she thinks no one who matters is listening. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, and I wondered if he was starting to piece together the picture. Mom, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. There's been no misunderstanding, I said firmly. I heard exactly what I heard, and I've decided that I'm done being taken for granted. But, Mom, we depend on that money. Our budget, our rent, everything is based on... Then I suggest you make some adjustments to your budget, I said. You're both adults. You'll figure it out. Mom, please, let's sit down and talk about this. Whatever Jessica said, I'm sure she didn't mean... Michael, I interrupted. Your wife regifted a $2,400 bracelet I bought specifically for her birthday, telling her friends it was too tacky for her taste and that I have no personality. She's been telling people that my generosity is guilt money from a lonely old woman who doesn't know how to connect with people. She's been using my allowance to fund a lifestyle she then presents as your success, never mentioning where the money actually comes from. The silence stretched on so long I thought he might have hung up. I didn't know, he finally said, and his voice was small. Didn't you? Or did you just choose not to see it because it was convenient not to see it? Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. If I'd known... But you didn't know, did you? In 6 years of marriage, you never noticed that your wife doesn't respect me. You never wondered why she stopped calling to thank me for the allowance. You never thought it was odd that she'd exclude me from social gatherings while spending my money on the lifestyle that gets her invited to those gatherings in the first place. I wasn't shouting. My voice was calm, steady, matter of fact. Somehow that seemed to make it worse. We'll make this right, Michael said desperately. Jessica will apologize. We'll have you over for dinner, No, I said simply. You won't. Because this isn't about apologies or dinner invitations. This is about the fact that for 6 years, I've been subsidizing the life of someone who has nothing but contempt for me. And I'm done. Mom, please. You can't just cut us off. We need that money. And there it was. Not, we're sorry we hurt you. Not, we want to make this right, because we love you. Just, we need that money. Then you should have thought of that before you decided I wasn't worth basic respect, I said. I hung up before he could respond. Jessica called an hour later. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Margaret, there's been a terrible misunderstanding, she said, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that had once fooled me. Michael told me you overheard something I said at the party, and I think you might have misinterpreted. Which part did I misinterpret? I asked calmly. The part where you called my gift tacky? Or the part where you said I have no personality? Or the part where you called my generosity guilt money? I was just... I'd had some wine, and I was trying to fit in with the other women. Sometimes people say things they don't mean when they're trying to be part of a group. You know how it is. No, I said. I don't know how it is. I've never mocked someone's generosity while accepting their money. I've never regifted an expensive present and then insulted the giver behind their back. The bracelet thing, I can explain that. Sarah really did love it, and I thought... You thought you could erase my gift and make it yours to give. You had my personal engraving removed, Jessica. You literally erased my thoughtfulness so you could take credit for my generosity. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, the sweetness was gone from her voice. Look, Margaret, I'm sorry you're hurt. But don't you think you're overreacting a little? So I said some things I shouldn't have said. So I re-gifted one bracelet. Does that really justify cutting off our allowance completely? There it was. The real Jessica. The one who'd been hiding behind fake smiles and thank you cards for 6 years. The one who thought my hurt feelings were an overreaction, but that losing my money was a genuine crisis. Yes, I said simply. It does. But Margaret, we can't afford our lifestyle without that money. We'll have to move to a smaller place, change our whole budget. Then you should have thought of that before you decided to bite the hand that feeds you. This is ridiculous. The mask was completely off now. One conversation at a party, and you're willing to destroy our relationship over it? Jessica, I said, we never had a relationship. We had a financial arrangement that you mistook for a relationship. The line went quiet for a long moment. Fine, she said finally, her voice cold. But don't expect us to keep pretending to be your loving family if you're not going to support us anymore. I wouldn't dream of it, I replied. She hung up on me. Over. The next few weeks, I watched the consequences of my decision unfold with a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. Michael called several more times, alternating between apologies and attempts to negotiate. Could I at least reduce the allowance instead of eliminating it completely? Could we set up a payment plan for them to earn back my trust? Could I at least help them with their rent for a few months while they adjusted their budget? Each conversation revealed how little they understood about what they'd done. They seemed to think this was about hurt feelings that could be soothed with apologies and promises. They didn't understand that they'd shown me exactly who they were, and I'd simply decided to believe them. Jessica, on the other hand, had apparently decided that if she couldn't have my money, she didn't need to pretend to tolerate me anymore. The fake sweetness was gone, replaced by cold indifference. She stopped answering my calls entirely and made it clear that I was no longer welcome at their social gatherings, which was fine with me. I'd finally realized that being excluded from events where people mocked me wasn't actually a loss. About a month after I'd cut off their allowance, I ran into Sarah Patterson at the grocery store. Sarah was one of Jessica's friends. The same. Sarah, who had apparently been the grateful recipient of my re-gifted bracelet. "Oh, Margaret," she said brightly. "I've been meaning to thank you for the beautiful bracelet you gave Jessica to give to me for my birthday. It's absolutely stunning." Looked at her for a moment, taking in her genuine smile and obvious pleasure in the gift. "You're welcome, Sarah," I said. "I'm glad you're enjoying it." "I wear it everywhere," she continued. "It's easily the nicest piece of jewelry I own. Jessica said you specifically picked it out with me in mind, knowing how much I love vintage style. Pieces." Jessica had told her I'd picked it out specifically for her. The level of manipulation was breathtaking. "I'm glad it found its way to someone who appreciates it," I said. And I meant it. Sarah clearly treasured the bracelet in a way Jessica never had. "You're so thoughtful," Sarah said. "Jessica is so lucky to have such a generous mother-in-law." If only she knew, I thought. But I just smiled and changed the subject. 3 months. After cutting off their allowance, I was settling into my new normal when Dorothy called with some interesting news. "I thought you should know," she said. "Michael and Jessica have put their apartment up for rent. Word is they're moving to a much smaller place across town." I wasn't surprised. Without my $3,000 monthly contribution, they'd probably had to make significant lifestyle changes. "Also," Dorothy continued, "I heard from Linda Morrison that Jessica is looking for a job. Apparently, she's been out of work for so long that she's having trouble finding anything in her field. The dental hygienist who'd quit her job to focus on being a wife was discovering that 8 years out of the workforce had consequences. I see, I said neutrally. Margaret, are you sure you want to stick to your guns on this? I know they hurt. Your feelings, but they are family. Dorothy meant well, but she didn't understand. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. This was about self-respect. They made their choices, Dorothy, I said. Now they get to live with the consequences. The real test came during the holidays. For 6 years I'd hosted Christmas dinner, spending hundreds of dollars on food and gifts, creating elaborate celebrations that Jessica would critique and Michael would take for granted. This year, I made a different choice. Instead of calling to arrange our usual Christmas dinner, I booked a cruise to the Caribbean. Just me, a good book, and 2 weeks of sunshine and peace. Michael called in early December as I was finishing my packing. Mom, what should we bring for Christmas dinner this year? Jessica was thinking we could try that new cranberry recipe she found online. I won't be here for Christmas, I said casually. What do you mean you won't be here? Where are you going? I'm taking a cruise. I leave tomorrow. The silence stretched. On so long I checked to make sure the coal hadn't dropped. But what about Christmas dinner? What about our traditions? Our traditions. The ones where I did all the work while they showed up empty-handed and complained about my cooking. I've decided to start some new traditions, I said. Ones that don't involve me spending my holidays trying to please people who don't appreciate the effort. Mom, this is crazy. You can't just abandon Christmas. I'm not abandoning Christmas, Michael. I'm just spending it with people who want me there. What people? You're going alone on a cruise. Exactly, I said. I'm spending Christmas with someone who genuinely enjoys my company. Me. The call ended with Michael sputtering protests and promises to call me back, but I was already turning off my phone and heading to the airport. The cruise was magnificent. I sat on deck chairs reading mystery novels, ate at elegant restaurants where no one critiqued my choices, and had conversations with fellow travelers who were actually interested in what I had to say. I danced with charming gentlemen at the evening social hours and took photography classes with other retired people who'd decided to pursue new hobbies. On Christmas morning, I woke up in my ocean view cabin, ordered room service, and called my friend Dorothy to wish her a Merry Christmas. How's the cruise, dear? She asked. It's perfect, I said, watching dolphins play in the ship's wake through my window. I can't remember the last time I enjoyed Christmas this much. And have you heard from Michael? He's called and texted, but I'm not responding until I get home. This is my vacation from drama. When I returned home in early January, I had 17 missed calls from Michael and 3 voicemails that progressed from confusion to anger to something that might have been panic. The final voicemail was from Jessica. Margaret, we need to talk. This silent treatment is childish, and we have things to discuss about the family. I deleted all the messages without calling back. 2 weeks after my return, I was having lunch at the country club when Michael and Jessica walked in. They saw me immediately. I was sitting at my usual table by the window, and after a brief, heated, whispered conversation, they approached my table. Mom, Michael said, his voice strained. We need to talk. I looked up from my salmon salad, taking in their appearances. Michael looked tired, stressed, older somehow. Jessica looked angry, her jaw set in a hard line I'd never seen before. Hello, Michael. Jessica, I said politely. How are you both? How are we? Jessica's voice was sharp. We've been trying to reach you for weeks. You disappeared over Christmas, without telling anyone where you were going. I told Michael exactly where I was going. I corrected. I went on a cruise. While we sat at home with no family, no Christmas dinner. Nothing, she continued. Do you have any idea how that felt? I set down my fork and looked at her calmly. About as good as it felt to hear you tell your friends that I have no personality, and that my generosity is guilt money, I'd imagine. Her face flushed red. Are you ever going to let that go? I said I was sorry. No, Jessica. Actually, you didn't. You said you were sorry I was hurt, which is completely different from being sorry for what you did. Michael slid into the chair, across from me without being invited. Mom, look, we've been doing a lot of thinking since you cut off the allowance. Have you? Yes, and we realize we may have taken your generosity for granted. We want to make things right. I could see the country club dining room buzzing around us, other members pretending not to watch our family drama unfold over lunch. What exactly do you want to make right, Michael? Everything, he said earnestly. The way we treated you, the way we acted entitled to your money, all of it. We've learned our lesson. What lesson is that? Jessica shifted impatiently beside him. Look, Margaret, we get it. You wanted us to appreciate you more. Message received. Can we move past this now? I studied her face, seeing the barely controlled frustration, the calculation behind her eyes as she tried to figure out what I wanted to hear. You think this is about wanting appreciation? I asked. Isn't it? Jessica shot back. You cut off our allowance because your feelings were hurt. Well, congratulations. You got our attention. We're here, we're apologizing, and we're ready to make things right. What more do you want? What more did I want? I wanted my son to understand that respect isn't something you turn on and off based on financial consequences. I wanted my daughter-in-law to comprehend that generosity isn't guilt money. It's love in action. I wanted them to realize that I was a person deserving of basic courtesy, not an ATM that occasionally required emotional maintenance. But looking at their faces, Michael's desperate hopefulness, and Jessica's barely concealed impatience, I realized they still didn't get it. They thought this was a negotiation, a temporary inconvenience that could be resolved with the right combination of apologies and promises. I don't want anything, I said finally. That's the point. What do you mean? Michael asked. I mean, I don't want anything from either of you anymore. No gratitude, no appreciation, no family dinners where you tolerate my presence while spending my money. I'm done wanting things from people who fundamentally don't respect me. Jessica's facade finally cracked completely. This is insane, Margaret. You're destroying our family over a private conversation that you weren't even supposed to hear. I'm not destroying anything, Jessica. I'm simply refusing to fund it anymore. Fine, she snapped, standing up abruptly. Have it your way. But don't expect us to keep playing happy family if you're not going to be part of the solution. I don't, I said simply. She stormed out of the dining room, leaving Michael sitting alone with me, looking lost and confused. Mom, he said quietly, I love you. You know that, right? I looked at my son, my only child, the baby I'd rocked to sleep, the boy I'd cheered for at soccer games, the young man I'd been so proud to see graduate college and start his career, and felt a profound sadness. I know you think you do, Michael, I said gently. But love isn't just a feeling. It's also actions. And your actions have shown me that your wife's comfort is more important to you than your mother's dignity. That's not true, isn't it? In 8 years of marriage, you never once stood up for me when she was dismissive or rude. You never questioned why she stopped thanking me for the allowance. You never wondered why I was excluded from social events while my money paid for the lifestyle that got you invited to those events. He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. I'm not angry anymore, Michael, I continued. I'm just done. I'm too old to spend my remaining years trying to earn respect from people who've already decided I don't deserve it. I stood up, gathering my purse and jacket. Where are you going? Home, I said. To my house, which I bought with my money, to enjoy my life without having to worry about whether I'm appreciated or respected by people who see me as an obligation. Mom, wait. Please. Can't we work this out? I paused at his chair and put my hand on his shoulder, the way I used to when he was small and upset about something. Michael, I will always love you. You're my son, and nothing will ever change that. But I'm not going to bankroll disrespect anymore. If you and Jessica want a relationship with me, a real relationship, not a financial arrangement, then you need to figure out what that looks like without my money being part of the equation. I left him sitting there, staring after me as I walked out of the country club dining room with my head held high. Over the next few months, I heard through the grapevine about the changes in Michael and Jessica's life. Without my monthly allowance, they'd had to make significant adjustments. They'd moved to a much smaller apartment in a less expensive neighborhood. Jessica had finally found a job at a dental office, though it paid considerably less than what she'd made 8 years ago when she'd left the workforce. Michael had taken on freelance work in addition to his regular job, trying to make up the income shortfall. Their social life had changed dramatically. No more expensive dinners out? No. More weekend trips. No more designer clothes and accessories. Jessica's Instagram posts, once filled with restaurant meals and vacation photos, had become sporadic and much more modest in scope. I learned all this not from Michael, who had stopped calling after our encounter at the country club, but from Dorothy and other friends who heard things through their own social networks. I saw Jessica at the grocery store last week, Dorothy reported during one of our coffee dates. She looked different. Tired, maybe? And she was shopping with coupons. I felt a complex mix of emotions at this news. Part of me felt vindicated. They were learning what life was like without my financial support. But part of me, the part that had genuinely cared for them despite everything, felt sad that it had come to this. Do you ever regret it? Dorothy asked gently. Cutting them off, I mean? I considered the question seriously. Did I regret it? No, I said finally. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that they couldn't see me as a person deserving of respect. I regret that Michael chose his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity. But I don't regret refusing to fund my own humiliation. 6 months after the country club confrontation, I was surprised by a knock on my door on a Saturday afternoon. I opened it to find Michael standing on my front porch, alone, looking thinner and more worn than I'd ever seen him. Hi, Mom, he said quietly. Michael. I stepped aside to let him in, noting that he didn't have his usual confident bearing. He looked humbled. We sat in the living room where he'd played with toys as a child, where we'd had countless conversations over the years, where he'd told me about Jessica and their engagement and their plans for the future. How are you? I asked. I've been better, he said with a rueful smile. The past few months have been educational. How so? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When you cut off the allowance, Jessica was furious. Not hurt, not disappointed. Furious. And I realized that I'd never seen her that angry about anything that had happened to me. When I got passed over for a promotion last year, she barely reacted. When my car got totaled, she was annoyed about the inconvenience. But losing your money, that made her angrier than I'd ever seen her. I waited for him to continue. And then, when we had to move to the smaller apartment, when she had to go back to work, when we couldn't go out to expensive restaurants anymore, she started blaming you for everything. Not our financial choices, not our lack of savings, not the fact that we'd built our lifestyle around money that wasn't ours. She blamed you for being vindictive and cruel. How did that make you feel? Confused at first, then angry. Because even though I was upset about losing the allowance, I knew you had every right to spend your money however you wanted. And the more Jessica complained about you, the more I started thinking about everything. He looked up at me for the first time since he'd arrived. I started paying attention to how she talked about you, how she acted when your name came up. And I realized that she'd never really liked you, Mom. She tolerated you because of the money, but she'd never actually liked you as a person. This wasn't news to me, but I could see how painful the realization was for him. When did you figure that out? A few weeks ago we were talking about Christmas plans, and she said we should let you stew in your own guilt for another year before reaching out. She said that eventually you'd come crawling back because you couldn't stand being alone, and when you did, we could negotiate for even more money since you'd be desperate for our forgiveness. I felt a chill run through me. The level of manipulation was breathtaking. What did you say? I told her that maybe we should actually apologize for real, that maybe we should acknowledge that we'd treated you badly. And she said... He paused, swallowing hard. She said that you were a lonely old woman with more money than sense, and that we'd be stupid not to take advantage of that. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock Richard had bought for our 20th anniversary. She called you a mock, Mom, like you were a target for a con game. I reached over and took his hand, feeling how cold it was. I'm sorry you had to hear that, Michael. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. He said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry I let her treat you that way. I'm sorry I chose her comfort over your dignity, just like you said. I'm sorry I was so blind to what was happening. These were the words I'd wanted to hear for months, but now that he was saying them, I felt more sad than vindicated. What happens now? I asked. I don't know, he said honestly. Jessica and we're not doing well. It turns out that when you take away the comfortable lifestyle and the shared financial goals, we don't have much in common. She resents having to work, resents the smaller apartment, resents the budget constraints. And I resent the fact that she never saw you as anything more than a source of income. I'm sorry, Michael. I never wanted your marriage to fail. Didn't you? He asked, not accusingly but genuinely curious. Didn't part of you hope that cutting off the money would show me who she really was? I thought about his question carefully. Had I hoped that? Had I wanted him to see Jessica's true character? Maybe, I admitted. But not because I wanted to. Hurt you. Because I wanted you to be with someone who could love all the people you love, including me. He nodded slowly. I think I'm starting to understand that. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Mom, he said finally, I know I don't have any right to ask this, and I know you probably don't trust my judgment anymore, but could we try to rebuild our relationship? Without Jessica, without money, just us? I looked at my son, really looked at him. I could see the boy he'd been in his face, but also the man he was becoming. A man who was finally learning to see clearly, even when the truth was painful. I'd like that, I said. Rebuilding our relationship wasn't easy or quick. There were months of careful conversations, of Michael slowly learning to see me as a person rather than just a mother, of me learning to trust that his apologies were genuine rather than strategic. He and Jessica separated in the fall, and their divorce was finalized the following spring. I didn't take any pleasure in the end of their marriage, but I felt relief that Michael was finally free from someone who had never truly valued him or his family. During the divorce proceedings, Jessica made one last attempt to get to my money. She demanded that Michael ask me to pay for her legal fees, claiming that since I was the one who had caused their financial problems, I should help resolve them. Michael told me about this request during one of our weekly dinners. A new tradition we'd started, just the two of us, at modest restaurants where we could actually talk. "What did you tell her?" I asked. I told her that my mother wasn't responsible for our problems, and that I wouldn't insult her by asking for money from my ex-wife's lawyer. It was a small thing, but it meant everything to me. Michael was finally standing up for me, even when it would have been easier not to. 2 years after I'd cut off their allowance, I was living a completely different life. I'd joined a book club, started taking watercolor painting classes, and made new friends who knew me as Margaret, not as Michael's generous mother, or that widow with all the money. I'd also started volunteering at a literacy center, teaching adults to read. It was incredibly rewarding work, and for the first time in years, I felt like people valued me for who I was, rather than what I could give them. Michael had gotten a promotion at work and was dating a lovely woman named Sarah. Not the same Sarah who'd received my regifted bracelet, but a kindergarten teacher who made him laugh and who asked genuine questions about his family when they had dinner together. "She wants to meet you," Michael told me during one of our weekly dinners. "Are you sure?" I asked. "After everything that happened with Jessica, aren't you worried about mixing family and romance?" "Actually, that's exactly why I want you to meet her," he said. "Sarah thinks family relationships are important. She's excited about the possibility of having a mother-in-law who's involved in our lives." When I met Sarah a few weeks later, I could immediately see why Michael cared for her. She was warm, genuine, and interested in everyone around her. She asked about my volunteer work, my painting classes, my book club. She seemed to actually see me as a person with my own interests and experiences. "Michael talks about you all the time," she told me over dessert. "He's so proud of the work you're doing at the literacy center, and he showed me some of your paintings. They're beautiful." It was such a simple thing, but it meant the world to me. She saw value in who I was, not just what I could provide. 3 years after I'd overheard Jessica's cruel words at that dinner party, I was getting ready for another kind of celebration. Michael and Sarah were getting married, and they'd asked me to host the engagement party at my house. As I prepared for the party, I thought about how different everything was now. Instead of trying to buy affection with expensive gifts and monthly allowances, I was offering something much simpler: my home, my hospitality, and my genuine joy in their happiness. The party was small, just close friends and family, and the atmosphere was completely different from any gathering Jessica had organized. People were relaxed, genuine, happy to be there. Sarah's parents were lovely people who treated me like an equal rather than an obligation. Michael was more himself than I'd seen him in years. At one point during the evening, Sarah pulled me aside. "Margaret, I want you to know how much this means to us," she said. "Having the party here, in the house where Michael grew up, surrounded by people who genuinely care about us, it's perfect." "I'm just happy you're happy," I said, and I meant it. "Michael told me about what happened with his first marriage," she said carefully. "About how his ex-wife treated you. I want you to know that I would never... I hope you know that I see you as family, not as..." "I know," I said, squeezing her hand. "You don't need to worry about that." Later that evening, after the last guests had left and Sarah had gone home, Michael helped me clean up. "Thank you for tonight, Mom," he said as we washed dishes together. "For hosting, for welcoming Sarah, for everything." "Thank you for letting me be part of it," I replied. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about what you said that day at the country club. About how love is actions, not just feelings." "Oh. You were right. I thought loving you meant feeling affection for you, but I wasn't actually treating you with love. I wasn't protecting you, or standing up for you, or even really seeing you." I stopped washing the plate in my hands and looked at him. "But you see me now?" "I see you now," he said firmly. "I see how strong you were to cut us off when we needed cutting off. I see how gracious you've been about welcoming Sarah. I see how you've built this whole new life for yourself instead of sitting around feeling sorry for yourself. I see how much you give to other people without expecting anything in return." He paused, drying a glass carefully. "I see that you're not just my mother. You're Margaret Whitman, and you're pretty amazing." It was the best compliment I'd ever received. About 6 months after Michael and Sarah's wedding, I ran into Jessica at the mall. She was coming out of a discount clothing store, looking tired and older than her years. "Margaret," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Jessica, how are you?" "I'm fine," she said, but I could see that she wasn't. Her clothes were nice but not expensive. Her hair was well kept but clearly done at a budget salon. She looked like someone who was working hard to maintain appearances on a limited budget. "I heard Michael got married," she said after an awkward pause. "Yes, Sarah's a wonderful girl. I'm sure she is." There was something bitter in her voice. "I hope she appreciates what she's getting into." "What do you mean?" Jessica's carefully maintained composure slipped slightly. "I mean, I hope she realizes that being part of your family comes with expectations. Financial expectations." I looked at her with something approaching pity. Even now, even after everything that had happened, she still thought my relationships were transactional. "Actually," I said gently, "Sarah and Michael are doing quite well on their own. They don't need my financial support." "Really?" Jessica's eyebrows rose. "So you're not giving them a monthly allowance? Not helping with their mortgage? Not buying expensive gifts?" "No," I said simply. "I'm not." I could see her trying to process this information, trying to understand how my relationship with Michael could exist without money changing hands. "But then, what do you get out of it?" she asked. And the question was so sad, so revealing of her worldview, that my heart actually ached for her. "I get to be part of their lives," I said. "I get Sunday dinners and phone calls and pictures of their vacation. I get to feel proud of Michael's accomplishments and to watch Sarah pursue her teaching career. I get to be loved for who I am, not what I can provide." Jessica stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to understand a concept that was completely foreign to her. Love without conditions, relationships without transactions, family without financial incentives. "I have to go," she said finally. "Take care of yourself, Jessica," I said, and I meant it. As I watched her walk away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that Michael was free from her influence. Sadness that she'd never learned to value relationships over resources. And gratitude that I'd been strong enough to teach both of them a lesson about respect and self-worth. Now, 5 years after, I overheard those cruel words at that dinner party. I can look back on the whole experience with clarity and peace. Cutting off Michael and Jessica's allowance was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. but it was also one of the most important. It taught me that I deserved respect, that generosity without appreciation becomes enabling, and that sometimes you have to be willing to lose something in order to save it. It taught Michael that love requires action, that taking people for granted has consequences, and that his loyalty belonged with people who actually valued him and his family. And it taught Jessica, though she may never admit it, that people aren't ATMs, that relationships require genuine care and respect, and that treating others badly eventually catches up with you. I don't regret the money I spent on them over the years. I don't regret trying to help them build a life together. I don't even regret giving Jessica chance after chance to show me basic respect. What I would regret is if I'd continued to enable their behavior, continued to accept being treated as a source of income rather than a human being deserving of love and respect. Today, my relationship with Michael is stronger than it's ever been. We talk regularly, we enjoy each other's company, and he values my opinions and experiences. Sarah treats me like the mother-in-law she always wanted, including me in their lives, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. I still have plenty of money, and I still use it generously. But now I give it to causes and people who appreciate it, who use it well, who understand that generosity is a gift, not an entitlement. Donate to the literacy center where I volunteer, to scholarships, for students who can't afford college, to local charities that help families in need. I take my friends to nice restaurants for their birthdays, help my elderly neighbors with household repairs. And yes, I occasionally help Michael and Sarah when they have a genuine need, but as a gift between equals, not as an expected allowance. The Pitsu difference is that now, everything I give is truly appreciated. When I help someone, they understand that it's a choice I'm making, not an obligation I'm fulfilling. They say thank you and mean it. They use my gifts thoughtfully and with gratitude. And most importantly, they see me as a person first, a benefactor second. If there's one thing I want people to understand from my story, it's this. Generosity should never come at the cost of your self-respect. Being kind doesn't mean being a doormat. Being generous doesn't mean accepting abuse or ingratitude. You can love your family and still refuse to fund their disrespect. You can be a giving person and still expect basic courtesy in return. You can be understanding of people's flaws and still set boundaries when their behavior becomes unacceptable. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop enabling someone's worst impulses. Sometimes you have to be willing to lose a relationship in order to save it. Sometimes you have to teach people how to treat you by showing them what you won't tolerate. I spent 6 years trying to buy love and respect with my checkbook, and all I got in return was contempt, disguised as gratitude. When I finally stopped writing checks and started demanding basic human decency, I lost a daughter-in-law who had never really been family anyway. But I gained a son who finally learned to see me as a person worth respecting. That trade was worth every penny I didn't spend, and that, as they say, was that. Sometimes you have to show people you're not to be trifled with. What do you think? Did they get what they deserved? Or would you have handled it differently? I'd love to read your opinions in the comments below. Have you ever had to teach a lesson to someone who took you for granted? Share your story if you feel comfortable. If you enjoyed seeing these folks get their comeuppance and want more stories of well-deserved revenge, please hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like and click the notification bell so you won't miss the next one. Thanks for listening, and remember to stand up for yourselves.